it's in a format that can be seen via the Channel 4.
Can you check, can he see, is he getting that?
That's what I want to make sure.
Can you just ask him if it won't matter today, because we'll go forward, but we'll load it tonight after I just want to know.
Okay, man.
Right.
You have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Lawson. We are going to go through the proposal as best as we can glean it or determine it from information that is in the newspaper and some scenarios that were given to us at a police jury meeting. Most of the council, if not all of you, were at the meeting that we attended at the jury a week or so ago. At that meeting, there was a proposal on a tax reallocation of the 1 cent sales tax that was passed in 1967. It was again voted on in 1979 as a reallocation and rejected and left the same. And that leads us to today. We have two proposals, and we'll move through them rather quickly, but we also will probably have some follow-ups that Mr. Johnson asked me about earlier, and I'll wait for his questions on that at the next meeting. Again, this is a serious issue. It's about as serious an issue as we'll face. We had a special meeting already about it. It's important that we go through this with a mind toward resolving the issues, of course, but that we educate folks about how it affects Alexander. And with that, the first slide, September 1967, Rapides Parish approved a 1% tax on the retail sale and use of tangible private property and upon the sale of services in the parish, meaning a sales tax. It is not a population tax. It was not passed as a tax of that nature. And indeed, you probably won't find too many taxes that way. I'll get into why that's the case. 5 years later, the town of Ball incorporated. And at that time, that would have changed their allocation. The way the call went out, if you were incorporated, you shared differently than if you were unincorporated. So tax passes in 67, 5 years later, Ball incorporates. 4 years later, in May of 76, the town of Ball filed suit against the 11 governmental bodies receiving funds under the plan. This antedates or predates Mayor Hebron's. His word was battle, the same word we used at the special meeting. In his own words, his battle for this. So he had, I think, two predecessors, or at least one, started this process. But he has certainly been pushing this for some time. And I don't mean to state that in a negative. He's doing what he thinks he needs to do for his citizens, as we must. The suit was initially dismissed and then reversed in June of 79, 4 months before a parish-wide referendum occurred. The referendum in some ways mooted the whole issue because the people then spoke in 79. Subsequently, the reallocation was defeated by a majority of Rapides Parish citizens. Afterwards, both parties agreed that a trial judge would determine the rest of the case on the merits based on stipulated facts and briefs, which would happen typically in this kind of case. They actually just say, we all agree these are the facts, we all write a brief, it presents a question of law because everyone agrees on what the facts are and the judge decided the case. Trial judge ruled against the town of Ball. A quote from the judge was, if there is any discrimination, and the notion of discrimination that occurred was that they were now incorporated, and now they were being treated as though they were under the unincorporated group because of the time frame within which it occurred. So the judge said it is due to the voluntary act of residents of the town of Ball to incorporate. This created a class. In other words, they wouldn't have been that separate class had the town not chose to incorporate. Ball looked at it as, wait, we chose to incorporate, so now we should be in it. The judge said you chose to incorporate doesn't change the will of the people when they voted. Of course, we also know that, again, people decided again in 79, some 12 years later, and did the same thing, or they left it the same. A few people decided to incorporate. The entire distribution scheme of the parish would come to a halt. And Mr. Lawson, this statement was some wisdom that the judge shared that I think that we all have to think about in a minute. As you go through this, I want all of you to remember the statement, the entire distribution scheme of the parish would come to a halt, because there are many scenarios. What about if new cities become incorporated? How would a new allocation work, and how would it address those new cities? One big one I want to come to at some point and discuss with you, and maybe we don't do it tonight, maybe we do it at another meeting, is suppose you set up, as we heard from Mr. Linscomb and others, a plan where you redo it every so often. Well, Mr. Lawson, what happens if there's a reallocation and all the tax allocation under this plan treats Alexandria under the other one differently for bonding purposes? But all the other smaller townships, villages, and municipalities are allowed to bond under it. What happens, Myron, if there's a new allocation and the money's bonded up? The Constitution of the state of Louisiana says it's locked down forever. So if the population dynamics changed again, if Alexandria shoots through the roof, whatever happens. Now think about it if you're a small town or village that's unincorporated and you decide to incorporate. Once the new reallocation would occur, this very scenario becomes very true for everybody, because that's the end. Once the money's bonded, it's locked. And bonds are typically no less than 10 in 30 years. So we really have to be careful and really think about what it is we're trying to accomplish here and what it really means. Now, the good thing from our end is we don't believe that is what matters anyway. We think we can show you the case that what's happening now is the only way we can do it right now, because that's the way the contribution is set up, and we think that Alexandria provides valuable service to the parish beyond these issues. But I do want you to recall that statement about coming to a halt. Mr. Linscomb said, I think based on the way the population has changed, all citizens that pay this sales tax need to realize, and it needs to be reallocated so that every town in Rapides Parish gets more than they are getting. All the people in Rapides Parish are paying the 1 cent, but there are only certain areas that are receiving benefits. Another statement that I want you to take careful note of, because it is the case that everyone shares in the benefit. They don't share the same way if they're unincorporated versus incorporated. But the notion of reallocating so that you're creating a population fairness, if that's the premise we're starting with, what we intend to demonstrate to you today, without taking a position, we just want to educate folks, is Alexandria will not be sharing in a fairness or population reallocation. Will be actually checked so that we can't do certain things, and our citizens who contribute 60% to the tax base will actually have a value per person or per capita of half of what every other entity that shares would have. Half. By the way, the numbers we're using are the numbers they use. This isn't something that we went and created. These are the same numbers from Louisiana Tech. In fact, we based it on the report.
Explain the Louisiana Tech piece in that.
Okay. By law, Louisiana uses Louisiana Tech for its census extrapolation numbers as you go between the censuses that occur. So in between the 10 years, we looked at that. Census numbers, as you'll see in a minute, tend to have extrapolations that aren't always in agreement with trends, because Tech is looking at the actual trends on a yearly basis, whereas the census may look at a past history that was trending downward. When you're hitting an upward spike, and when the census cuts off, they're going to trend, you extrapolate downward still. And you're going to see some honest assessments of that, and I think you're going to see some very interesting assessments about the parish and how things work. Okay. Although some have claimed this proposal is based on population, it is our claim here, and again, not telling people how to vote or what they have to do, but if the premise is that this is a population change-based proposal, we're here to tell you that that's not what it has the effect of doing. I'm not talking to people's intent, and I think everybody's got the best intent in the world and they want to do what's fair and right. We just want to point out how this affects Alexandria. Under the new proposal, as it stands, doesn't mean it can't change, but what we've seen reported, we would receive $85.60 per person. That's what I was saying a while ago, Myron, about the half value. Everyone else receives under the new one $151.86 per person. So again, if it's based on population, why does Alexandria get punished, in essence, by the reallocation when you fund 60% of the tax base? Again, we talked about it last time. The criticisms are the folks in the parish, and we appreciate this very much, Mr. Lawson and Mr. Marshall, and you know that. We appreciate the folks that come here. We appreciate all the commerce that occurs here. And the notion is if we all live out in the parish and come to Alexandria, we should share more because you're getting the full benefit. We also have the cost of the infrastructure and the tax on our system, the physical taxing of the system by supporting, and we're going to show you some interesting numbers on what that means too. But even if that were the case, that argument was the right argument. Although I would suggest to you, if Mr. Hobbs goes to Lafayette and eats at Ruth's Chris one night and has a big fat steak, when he comes back here, we don't have to send, I can't call Joey Durrell and say, Mayor, I want you to send back $10 on that ticket because Mr. Hobbs lives in Alexandria. We just can't do that. And I'm saying it comically, but that's the case. That's the way tax bases generally work. Moreover, the population data indicates Alexandria is actually wrong. So we start with a few premises, Mr. Lawson. One is that this is a population-driven new allocation proposal. And what we're going to suggest to you is it is not. It at least doesn't have the effect of being that. It may have been the intent. The other premise we start with is that Alexandria is losing population, and everywhere else in the parish it's going up, at least to the extent compared to Alexandria. We're going to suggest to you that that is true. That is not true either. So if you start with these two main points, and you go back to this quote and this quote, which is if there's a population shift and it shifts back to inside Alexandria, this is the last thing anyone wants to do. We're going to ask you to look at those two items, and then we're going to go through what we think we can show you about whether that's what's happened. All right, so we're going to look at 8 years, and we're going to look at the population. The city of Alexandria is currently appealing the La Tech population estimate. That's not a negative thing. That's a positive. Everybody, I've talked to some of the other mayors, they want to look at it too. But our Louisiana Tech population is above 48. So it's already has trended up from the last numbers. We're not appealing something where we're at 45 or 42 asking to go up. We're appealing what is already showing an upward slope.
Mayor,
yes,
based on your statement, based on population measures, over the last 4 years, based on Rita and Katrina, did our population escalate based on the amount of people that came to this area?
We believe from all the data we have that and we're not necessarily using that in this because we think it may be too speculative, right? We haven't really done that. The answer is it probably has moved up. We don't know the exact numbers. I've heard numbers from as high as 7,000, which I think is high, if that's stayed, I think we would have felt it a little more, and as low as 1,000 or 2,000. I don't know the answer to that. I think we certainly went up, not down. But I think you're going to find, Mr. Johnson, in some of the other hidden problems with numbers that we clearly have more than what we did. And Alexandria has its own problems. Our numbers are going to be down because we misreported some of the numbers ourselves on new building and so forth. And you're going to see that, and that's what we're appealing. Right now, that appeal occurred before, it actually occurred the same day the story came out. I was handed the appeal and signed it at the same time I was doing an interview with the Town Talk on the issue, and didn't realize how connected they were until about 5 minutes into it. But this is where we are. Louisiana Tech indicates Alexandria. By the way, everyone uses Tech. Everyone in the state is using the Tech numbers, and we're going to show you the Tech and census numbers when we come to the graphs side by side. We showed growth since 2000. Last year, Louisiana Tech estimated 48,490. Our appeal puts us at 50,166. New findings since then, we're appealing that appeal, and you had to have done the first appeal timely to be able to do subsequent appeals, would put us even higher. So that's where our numbers would be. Even if we stick with the 48 and don't go with the 50,000, even if we stick with the 48, everything that we're going to show you in this presentation still maintains and holds true. State funding is tied to Louisiana Tech population estimates, not the U.S. Census. So it is an official data source, and it is accepted for legal purposes in the state. We believe the city of Alexandria has inadvertently underreported its population for at least the past 4 years. Alexandria's population also represents a greater percentage of the total Rapides Parish population. All right. These are the Tech numbers. The Tech numbers are in this red burgundy color, and the census numbers are the blue. These are, of course, 10-year. These are census numbers out the green. So I want y'all to look at this because it's very interesting. In 1950, this is 35,000. Look at the trend of Alexandria, how it did. when we all talked the other day, Byron, if you recall at the jury meeting, I made the statement, and I grew up hearing the statement, and we made the statement at the special meeting, Mr. Marshall, that so goes Alexandria, and I think to some extent now, so goes Alexandria Pineville, so goes the parish. Well, what you're about to see is what we suggested at that meeting, Roosevelt, where that's actually true. Here's your parish numbers. Look at the way, Alexandria has moved in population. The biggest point of Alexandria was here in 1980. Now then you break down, this is within a 10-year period. These are, of course, 10-year periods. Just watch this slope, Mr. Lawson, as this slope comes around. Notice the angle of the slope with the tech numbers.
It's not a bell-shaped curve, is it?
It's moving a little bit up like this. You see the trend here. We think the numbers are about right there. But let's go with the tech numbers before the appeal. They're clearly higher than this, but even the census numbers show a sloping that's not necessarily trending down. You see how it's moving? I'm going to go forward a little just to make the point. This is interesting, ladies and gentlemen, about so goes the city, so goes the parish. Look at the parish. It did the same thing as the city, and look at the slope. It does the same thing as the city. So it's in fact true, so goes the city. In other words, when the city tended to do well, or look at it a different way. When our parish has done well, Alexandria has moved up and done well. When our parish has lost population or done poorly, our city has fallen and done poorly. So we are a mirror of each other. We reflect each other. And you can look at these slopes and see that. Now look at what the census has for the parish. We didn't hear about this the other day, but they have them going straight down. But we're not using those numbers. We believe our parish is doing well and trending just like this. Back to the slide where we were. Don't they look similar? The parish and the city almost in lockstep with each other. So we've maintained roughly 38% of the parish population all the way back to 1967 when this tax was passed, all the way to now. We have roughly found ourselves between 35 and 38% of the parish population.
Where is this, where are the numbers coming from where folks are saying we're losing population? They're just using the last census data?
Well,
is what they're using, or where's the credible information?
Mr. Lawson, I want to be polite and nice, so I'll say it this way. Sometimes when a lawyer presents his case, you use the best numbers for the stuff that supports you and your worst numbers for the stuff that you need to go the other way. And so if one were to take the census numbers when they hurt Alexandria and the tech numbers when they helped something else and use them in the same presentation, you would arrive obviously at something slightly different than maybe you should, and I don't know that that's what's occurred. But I do want to make this point now, in case we run short on time, because we need to make this point. The notion that the unincorporated townships and villages will work out in this scenario and do better is not true. The only way that that has been proposed under what was reported in the newspaper is by an artificial cap placed on Alexandria. That artificial cap is to place us locked in 17% no matter whether we grow or not. Well, that has the effect of allowing, in case our population is where we say, and in case other places are where they really are, which is lost numbers, and you'll see that, they actually would lose money in this. But what is being promoted around the parish is that everybody wins but Alexandria. And that's just not the case, ladies and gentlemen. I'm going to suggest to you at the end of the day, because so goes the city, so goes the parish, it's not a wise thing for us to do anyway. And we need a lot of time to think about this rather than a quick, let's try to get this on an October election. And people are hearing all kinds of things. We'll stand this up to anybody and show them these numbers and ask them to refute what's in them. We don't have any problem doing that. And from what I understand, some of the parish folks are saying that they've now gone back and looked at the numbers, and they're saying what we're saying, that the numbers don't work out that way in the final analysis. I'll go forward, Mr. Lawson, move real quick.
It's okay.
This is why we think we underreported. Building permits, new housing units have been significantly underreported for the past 4 years. In 04, we underreported by 29%, significant. In 05, about 76%. This number is very high. We want to check into that and make sure, but it looks like that's the case now. In 06, by 32%, and in 07, 52%. Those are pretty significant numbers of underreported for permits. We even have some situations where group homes, and different homes like that were reported as single housing units, which would have been, for an estimate purpose, looked at very different. So you could have an apartment complex, and we have that in this case, that has over 100 units that's get reported as a single family unit. You know, ladies and gentlemen, in this situation where you're talking about from 48,000 or 49,000 to that 50,000 mark, a couple of hundreds add up very quickly to 1,000, and that can change things drastically. So that's the reason for the appeal. We want to be very straightforward with the public. We feel like a lot of the information out there has been sort of all over. Our information will be available to be challenged and looked at in any way. We want it to be straightforward and tell you there's an appeal, but this is a normal process. Other folks are going to appeal their numbers too. It's very, in fact, we should be doing it. We had talked about doing it some time back, and it just worked out that this issue came up at the same time. We talked about this. If this is what it's about, a population shift, then we want to hold everybody to that statement, because this is the important stuff. Okay, here's Rapides we showed you. Does basically what Alexandria is doing. Today, Alexandria has a larger share of Rapides Parish's total population than it did in the 60s and 70s. They're 60 and 70. This tax occurred in 67, right? I'll look at where Alexandria is now. Here's a graphic that kind of etches it in your mind what we're talking about. Alexandria in the pie by population. That's the city, and that's everyone else. Outside of this grayish color is everyone else. That's what we're talking about. And we're talking about $4 to $5 million a year being removed from the city. And from a budgetary standpoint, I don't need to tell you what that could mean for the city, but that's by population. And very importantly, when we talk about the population issue, this goes with that pie. Think of that pie and then think of under this allocation with this false cap you put on Alexandria, these are the numbers you get. Now, where does that cap come from? It comes from this. Imagine the pie. Go back to it. Here's the pie. Well, let's cut it in half. 50% of the tax, remember, goes to the school board. Then of your other 50%, a third, 33% to Alexandria, 5% to Pineville, 9% to the jury, and everyone else shares. So the notion is you've got to remove that 50% because no one wants to take anything from the school board. And so we're dealing with that other half of the pie. Well, what has been done by the proponents of this, Mr. Linscomb and Mayor Heapman, would be to take our 33%, and since you're removing 50% out, you just cut the 33% in half. We suggested to you at the last meeting, we thought that was a theory. We've confirmed that was the theory. That gets you to 17%. But that's an artificial situation if you look at what the real numbers are. But even if you assume that, the proposal went further to cap Alexandria forever at 17 in the reallocation, no matter what we go to, but everyone else can move. Why? What would be the purpose for this?
Mr. Mayor.
Yes, sir.
That to me, it violates any type of sense of fairness when you treat Alexandria like that. But what about, say, the one man, one vote? Doesn't it violate something in that area or something like that?
It's a good point. The issue is, since the parish, since we tend to vote, at least in Louisiana, parish parochially on these sales taxes, it's been accepted. We're almost in the situation where, because of that $81.56 versus the $151.56, the citizens of Alexandria would, of course, say, well, wait a minute, we're paying the tax. Look at this number. This is who pays into the tax base. That's Alexandria. We're paying this into the tax base, regardless of the fact that we know everybody comes here. Just like Alexandrians, by the way, travel outside of Alexandria to Lafayette. Now that I'm an elected official, that drives me crazy. I talk to people every weekend. We're going to Lafayette to spend the day. We're going to the Festival International. And I'm saying, no, you got to go to Q and you have to stay in Alexandria. But we lose folks that go and buy in other places. It's just a natural consequence of how things are done. People are going to go to other places. We pay the vast majority, or we generate the vast majority of the tax, nearly 60%. It's about 58%. I reported to you erroneously at the last meeting it was 52. Ms. Andrews, I think, has confirmed who works for the parish and generated much of the information, that it's higher. And Mr. Crutchfield has confirmed it's as high as 58%. Is that correct?
Yeah.
So,
58, 59.
I mean, Mr. Lawson, here's our population part. Here's what we contribute to the tax base itself. As you can see, that's us. You saw the numbers earlier where we're going to get half the value. Why would Alexandria, that contributes that, has the population we have, get half the value per person? Under any scenario, ladies and gentlemen, whether we reallocate or not, whether we look at this in any way as a new allocation, that's unfair. That is the quintessence of being unfair for Alexandria. And that's why this is so important and why we want to do this presentation. Ball generates between $60,000 and $100,000 into the tax base. Under the scenario proposed by Buck Lincecum and Mayor Hebron, Ball would get $620,000 out of the new allocation.
Repeat that again, excuse me.
Why would they be for that?
I want you to repeat that again.
I know why it's for. I know why it's for.
I saw Mr. Marshall and Mr. Hobbs lean forward. You said that number, repeat that again, man.
Between 60 and 100,000 is the contribution, based on the numbers we have, and we're using Donna Andrews' numbers at the parish. That's what they would contribute per annum to the tax base. In return, under the reallocation, they would receive $620,000. That's this. The proposal allows some smaller municipalities to receive 5 to 10 times more revenue than they generate. Again, Alexandria, and I don't believe it's intentional, but Alexandria is being punished. It's not bringing other people up and lowering us a little. We're actually being punished for being the biggest contributor to the tax base. And ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to suggest that if it's about bringing the whole parish up, if Alexandria lost this money, and you lose all of those essential quality of life initiatives, systems, those kind of things, you will not be able to attract the types of businesses that we want that help in the whole parish. You just can't do that. You can't function as a city in an 8 to 9 parish area. Alexandria is a hub city. You can't do that without that other program. And that's back to the number I keep telling you. We will receive half of what we generate. Alexandria, which generates the majority of the tax, will receive less than half of what it generates. Now, these are very important. This is what I said at the top of the meeting, Mr. Lawson, and I thought you and I talked about, you wanted to make sure and include. Although Alexandria has a population of around 50,000, let's say 48, 450, whatever the tech number before the appeal said. Our infrastructure must support 150,000 people every day. Larry Matthews knows that as well as anybody in here. 150,000 people per day use this infrastructure. Our hospitals and airport service in areas of over 400,000 people. Reducing this tax income in half directly affects the operations of the city in a time of unprecedented growth and opportunity. And I would suggest, for me, I would extend that line to reducing this tax income in half would directly affect the parish's operations in a time of unprecedented growth. And that's just my personal notion. You included a slide showing it the same things. This is the right page. Again, we've already gone forward earlier, but you can see that same slope, and you see that it's done the same thing as Alexandria. That's 140,000 at the top to give you a reference point. That was about 135,000 at the parish's height. In what year? 1980. In what year was Alexandria's height? 1980. It's an exact proportion. It stayed about 38% since about 1950, ladies and gentlemen. I guess that's why we all grew up here, and so goes the city, so goes the parish. I guess nobody had ever really looked at it this way. It happens to be true. City of Alexandria, you've seen that. So these are look at them together. They look real similar, don't they? Parish and the city. Percent of Rapides Parish residents in 1970 we were 35, and 06 we're by the lower numbers we were at 37.5. Of course, we think we're somewhere at 38 now. but that is not a downward trend as the paper reported. I know the paper was reporting what folks were being quoted as saying, but this is not a downward trend at all. Pineville population. Pineville's doing well. Pineville has gone up in the 10 years, caught a good many people between this 12,000 and 14,000 mark. Their census number in 06 actually showed them a little higher than the tech number, but I think that after I talked to Clarence, he felt the same way. He had some issues that he was thinking about appealing that had to do with the same kinds of things we did. So that's all he said. We didn't get into it too much, but Pineville doing great, as we would have thought they were doing and expected Pineville to do. Hall's numbers by tech, ladies and gentlemen, trending down. Flat on the census, trending down by Louisiana Tech.
Mayor Roy, one of the things you talked about in discussion and had Nat mentioned is the tremendous loss to the city of Alexandria so far as revenue is concerned.
Yes.
Can you state that for the public at large?
We just went over the budget today, so it was a great timing for all this. The budget ended up being about $58 million. It's a $60 million budget. We were looking the other day before we actually saw those final numbers. 35 million of our budget goes to employees, and we highlighted that today. If people are watching the earlier meetings, they'll see when we pointed that out. So take out the 35 million of employees, that leaves you with $15 million that we operate all these services. Now this is apart from our capital budget. That brings us above 200 million. But remove the capital budget, talk about the operational annual budget, remove the 35 for the employees that benefit everyone, certainly well beyond the city limits, and you're talking about 4 or a little above 4 million of that remaining 15. That's 26%. 26%. That's a sizable chunk of change. That directly affects the programs we highlighted earlier. So you're left with a terrible choice, or they're left with a terrible choice, and you cut non-essential services. And what exactly does non-essential mean? Is the zoo non-essential? Anybody here? How do you choose between them? We have pay plans for the fire and police. Are those non-essential? But are they more non-essential than, say, cutting the existing employment apparatus as we currently have? Those are the discussions we'll be having. Or do we have to look at all the other things that we do? And some folks have said that I shouldn't make this statement, or this sounds threatening. It's not threatening at all. As a mayor, do I cut the citizens here and their quality of life programs for their children first? Or do I have to protect the city first and foremost? Isn't that my fiduciary responsibility, and look outside first? And if that means all the services we provide, and we talked about that, and there are tons of them, and they're 7 figures. What we provide parochially out in the whole parish. What do you do as a mayor? It puts me in a terrible position because I believe in regionalism. And I know all these other mayors do too. But that's where we are if we're talking about $4 million. If we're talking about $4 million, that's where we're at.
And they're talking about that $4 million. Would these be immediate cuts if this proposal was to pass?
If this proposal came in October, we're coming to you before a major budget amendment saying we have to stop everything we're doing, and the budget we just may be sending to the people to be passed is not going to be the budget.
Be out the window.
We would be committing malfeasance to even, we're really in a precarious situation right now, Mr. Johnson, because we're proposing a budget to you with folks saying that this is going to happen potentially in October. Now, we feel confident that people will think very hard about this, but again, I can't suggest what people should vote or how they should vote or anything. I can only show you that these are the numbers. This is Paul. Here's LeCount. Pretty static. That's great. They're doing great. Boyce, look at Boyce, doing great. Growing, and Boyce needs our help. They do need our help, and we need to be able to do more intergovernmentally to help Boyce, and we are committed to that.
Mayor, and with that said, in your next presentation, can you show us in another presentation what we provide for other communities within
Yes.
Rapides Parish?
Yes, and we didn't do that today Because, Mr. Johnson, we're trying to soft pedal this and show people that we're not trying to make this a hammer or a threatening thing at all, and that's why we didn't do it today. In any event, boys, woodwork, look at woodwork doing great, trending up. Cheneyville has remained pretty flat, but that's a good sign over 6 years. Cheneyville's another city that needs our help, and I think we should be there to do that. Glenmore,
Mayor,
nice flat, Glenmore.
can I also, maybe we might also look at something else. Employees, city employees.
Yeah.
The city of Alexandria does not have a requirement that all employees live within the corporate limits of Alexandria.
That's correct.
I wonder how many of our employees live in Ball and
We have, as you know, quite a few. Quite a few. And I understand the question, I understand the implication of the question.
but we might want to.
Yes, we do. And I want y'all to notice on these, when you see in these flat, you see this upward there, upward movement here, Cheneyville flat. On Forest Hill, now remember, this looks like, man, what's going on in Forest Hill right here? But look, you're dealing with small changes in small numbers. So this graph is sort of lost on us because you're talking about between 500 and 560 people. So a new neighborhood right there can skyrocket that one. So I just want to make sure that everybody's watching that. McNary, you're talking about the difference between 210 and 215 people, but still trending up. So these are important. We have lots of unincorporated areas. The notion that's been said is that everyone will do great, and the only folks that might get sacked a little hard is Alexandria. That isn't true because we can't ever have this artificial cap placed. If you remove the artificial cap of the 17% that we explained earlier that you get, it is not true that the unincorporated areas do better. In fact, the ones that have any trending of population that isn't going up, and indeed even some of those that are going up, will lose money. And I think people have to know that when they think about how they would approach consideration on this tax. And that's very important. One of the mayors that was there the other day asked, could it be this simple? And the answer is no. And these are the numbers that justify why we make that statement with some degree of confidence. It's not that simple. Your parish and Alexandria look just alike, and they have since 1950. Just alike. Same trend, same trend. 38%, it's remained static for over 50 years now. That's important for us to think about when we talk about a reallocation that happened in 67. There's a vote in 1979. 12 years later, after all the smoke had cleared, there's another vote, and the folks looked at it all and they made the decision they made. These are the numbers. These are the numbers that Ms. Andrews has provided to the parish. They don't change. That's the presentation on that. I have another presentation that dealt just with the case that occurred back when there was a lawsuit. It's real short. Y'all can we can do it at the next meeting if you want, or y'all can do it now. But this is just an idea, Mr. Lawson, of why this has to be approached carefully. We think with some degree of thought. We think, again, if you reallocated in October, if that happened, first, the numbers didn't make any sense to us, and we knew that. Now we've gone in and seen why. But even if you did that, then you could lock down through bonding, and that's what any municipality would do. If you received a better stream of income, you're going to bond that money up. So the notion that you can then, as Mr. Linscomb and others suggested, reallocate every 10 years when the census comes out isn't true. Because the Constitution does not allow that. Once money is bonded, it's locked, it's done. Otherwise, citizens, it would be chaos. And so, since bonding tends to take 20 to 30 years, looking at it every 10 years wouldn't help anybody. And that's the reality. But these statements are also the reality. We have to think about that we have to be fair to every city. And so, we have to think about if there's a shift, then we should look at things. And what I'm here to tell all of you is, I believe that if you look at these numbers, there's no shift. These numbers show the same thing has been happening since 1950. So thank you very much for listening, and I hope that we'll be careful in our approach, and that the committee hearing that I'm going to attend on Wednesday will be fruitful in terms of at least slowing some of this down. I think we need some real science, gentlemen, behind how this would affect the parish if we did this to the city.
Okay. Again, thank the mayor and certainly the support team for the presentation. I think it's very thorough and it's informational. I didn't hear the mayor take a position. I didn't hear the mayor suggest a political position. To make clear that it was information, which is what this body needed and what the taxpayers need. And I want to say one other thing. I don't think we have a bad mayor in Rapides Parish. I think Roy Hebron is a very honorable man, and he fights for his town, and rightfully so. I just think somewhere in between all of this, we need to continue to support, as you alluded to earlier, expand our non-governmental relationships with the other municipalities to see how we can further our relationships. But I don't think you build a neighborhood by utilizing your neighbor's lumber. I think the intent is to bring lumber in from other places. Anyway, as we move on, thank you again, Mayor. I think we can turn the lights on. Chuck got lost after the lights here.
Mr. Lawson for helping us put
Certainly,
together
Mr.
this
Crutchfield.
presentation. Daniel is from our planning department, and Ms. Lamar White for putting together some of the numbers and graphs and things that we needed to show you.
You do know I didn't think that you and Mr. Crutchfield did that video presentation.